Hey everyone, uh, welcome to another webisode of Garden Chat. I'm Mark. I'm here with my teammates Gia, Jennifer, and Kaylee. We're super excited about this particular uh, webisode. Jenny already has written, hi Jenny. Jenny's from Daytona Beach. Love you guys. Thanks for your programs. It's good to see you. Good to see you keeping well and safe, Jenny. Let's get started with our presentation for you. So let me go ahead and add it into our stream. So welcome to another webisode of Garden Chat. And I just put in our chat box to go ahead and subscribe to YouTube. So if you are on Facebook and you want to revisit this, we've already put it into the chat box. Go ahead and subscribe. The channel link is easily available right now. So simply click and subscribe now. And it looks like this. And there'll be a red button right here that says subscribe. And there's tons of different programs and topics that we have done as part of our garden chats, as well as table talks and our monthly programs, etc. So our library of different interesting topics is growing very fast. And join. So show your love and support. You can join Cuplet Fern. We got a inquiry not too long ago from someone that would like to participate and show their love and support, but they were wondering if we do a lot of online programs. We do, and once COVID is behind us, we'll do a lot more in-person meetings as well. So we have programs, webisodes, classes, so much more. And then memberships, if you're a student, it's a different price point. Individuals is different. And then they also have business and household level. So consider that. Go to fnps.org and discover the allure of native plants with us. So here is fnps.org. And if you click on join, you'll find this link right here. And if you scroll down, you can actually select Cuplet Fern from the drop-down box. It's just that simple. All right, and our team today is Gia, Kaylee, myself, and Jennifer. Gia will be discussing wet flatwoods, wet prairies. Kaylee will be discussing scrubby flatwoods, mesic flatwoods. Mark will be, myself, I'm sorry, hydric hammock and xeric hammocks. And Jennifer will be discussing sandhill and bayhead swamp. Some of the resources, I'm going to put these into the chat box as well so that the links become active and you can just click on them and explore them in a separate tab. We got a lot of information from Florida Natural Areas Inventory, so we're particularly grateful for their resources towards this particular webisode. A special thanks always goes out to our social media friends. Some of the visuals that we need we get from our social media followers as well as the ones that we follow. Ecosystems of Florida. I wanted to show you this book. It's a great book. It's by Myers and Ewell. It's a good book for intermediate native plant enthusiasts. So in case you're looking forward to taking the next step further, just not from Basics 101, but you want to actually learn a more nuanced approach to native plant gardening, I really recommend the Ecosystems of Florida book. University of Florida also provided some resources on the ecological communities of Florida. Florida Native Plant Society, I'll pull this up for you guys. It has a particular tab and it's right here. You click on native plant communities and this is the page that shows up. It's a nice visual for people that are trying to understand the different kinds of ecosystems we have and plant communities we have. So we pulled some of the information from here as well. But this is a nice, quick rundown on different kinds of plant communities that existed throughout the state. So in case you need something short and sweet, definitely go to fnps.org. The website is still under development, so keep that in mind. They just transitioned to a brand new website. And then, of course, FAN, Florida Association of Native Nurseries. So I'll put this into the chat box as well. They had a lovely map, courtesy of the University of Florida, that they had put in a particular web page, which we found pretty helpful for this website. So our topic today is gardening inspired by Florida native plant communities. And Gia, if you'd like to take it over from here, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. All right, so first we kind of want to define what native plant communities are. Like, what are we talking about when we are mentioning native plant communities? And basically, a natural community or a native plant community is a distinct and recurring assemblage of populations of plants, animals, fungi, and microorganisms naturally associated with each other and their physical environment. So that is a formal definition. Basically, it's a collection of its plants that you commonly associate with each in in certain conditions. We'll talk more about kind of what that means exactly. So basically, what we're going to do, we're going to learn a little bit about the some of the most common plant communities in specifically the Central Florida area, since that's where we're located. So we kind of chose some plant communities that you'll find nearby, like in the Seminole County, Volusia County, Orange County, Lake County, kind of like in that Central Florida area. And also, we want to help you understand how to kind of view these areas that are close to you, how to identify what they are exactly, and use that information to help you plan your home landscape. Like several webinars ago, I had discussed about, walking through your neighborhood or any natural areas close by to help you learn what grows naturally in your area. This is kind of expanding on that in a way, learning a little bit better about how to identify ecosystems and how to use that in the home landscape and how to group things together that are going to do well together in the same kind of site conditions. So, and the importance of this for anyone who's new to native gardening, seasoned native plant gardeners kind of, maybe understand a little bit of this. But if you're new, the reason that we choose to garden this way as opposed to, kind of the more traditional exotic, plant gardening is this is more sustainable. It is a way to choose plants that are going to thrive in what you already have. So you don't have to worry about extra watering or extra fertilizer. A lot of these communities we're going to talk about do not have nutritious soils. It's either very dry or very wet or very acidic. And this is working with what you have. So that makes it a lot less water, a lot less fertilizer that you have to worry about. Habitat restoration. So basically, you're kind of you're making your yard an extension of nature. And it also provides, by doing that, it provides wildlife value. You're providing habitat and food for wildlife that maybe otherwise would have been taken away because of human development, because of any kind of exotic plants that maybe they don't recognize as food. So this is helping to restore, make it an extension of nature, and provide for wildlife as well. Okay, Kaylee, I would like for you to kind of explain your thoughts on this, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, yeah. I put this in because I was thinking about how, like, if you drive down the road between one part of town to another and it's within the same generalized community of like flatwoods or scrubby upland areas, and then you'd see the differences in the layout of the land, like the elevation changes or any bodies of water, anything like that will really cause some differences. So you have like a small patch of each little habitat within a mosaic of all these different ones. So I wanted to talk about how um, there's so many different ones. So if you're sharing plants from your yard and somebody maybe, a bit down the road, they can't support the same plants in their yard because it's just not the right, site conditions for them. And so like some of the things that will make an impact there is like the soil. If you have sandy or loamy clay or any of that kind of stuff, organic matter, the humidity. Like if you have big, large oak trees in the area and they kind of create like a trapping area of humidity, it raises that, you know, and the temperature also rains and the location, like how it, you know, goes from east, west, north, south, you know, the climate will change things. So it's all different things to consider. Like if you're trying to take an example from somebody else's garden and you want to try to make that work in yours, you want to try to work it around to work with your land. So it's the right plant, right place kind of motto would work for that.
Yeah, it's crazy because even within like my own, within my neighborhood, people down the street from me will have completely different plants in their yard than what I have. I don't have any oak in my yard except for water oak, but then down the road, you know, people have oak and they have orchids in their trees and they've got a lot of things that I don't have, you know. Even in my own yard, you know, there's higher parts of my yard and there's lower parts of my yard. And I will see, you know, where certain plants are grouping in certain areas because it's a wet spot. There's hat pins that are all, or this, you know, little rush grass that's growing in this little area. Whereas like the, what do you call it? The silk grass that popped up is more like in a drier area, you know, in the same yard. So that is something to keep in mind, that it's, even though you might identify a community and think, oh, this is what I have, it's close by, there's still going to be little varying things within each property that's probably going to throw you off. But so this is more about paying attention to site conditions and kind of learning a little bit about what we have around us and just using that to, you know, do what you can. So it's a lot, but we'll kind of get through some ones at least.
Yeah, it's been a fun learning process.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the ones that I chose was wet flatwoods because I kind of, the area that I live in is probably mesic flatwoods, wet flatwoods. It's kind of a weird mix and it's kind of difficult to identify because it's been fire suppressed. So in my area, there's lots of saw palmetto, which would probably be more mesic flatwoods, I believe, right, Kaylee? They have more of the understory of saw palmetto, I think, right?
Yes, that's right. When it's wet, they don't have much of an understory of shrubs. It's grassy, more open.
Yeah. So
At least my understanding.
that's kind of what I saw, what I was finding as well. So in a lot of resources, you'll see pine flatwoods kind of grouped together, but there's different kinds of pine flatwoods. There's wet flatwoods, there's the mesic flatwoods, there's scrubby flatwoods. So when you're researching, you know, kind of keeping in mind, there's different variations of pine flatwoods. So the reason I went with this is because, you know, I love wetland plants. That's kind of my favorite thing. And I wanted to understand a little bit more about this and see if this was maybe closer to what my community is. So basically, I'm going to kind of read this description kind of wrote up for you guys. So it's basically flat land. So it's flat, mainly flat or very gently sloped or pine forest with sparse or absent mid-story, abundant wetland grasses and herbs and low shrubs. So what you're finding in this is going to be mainly to differentiate this from mesic flatwoods is you're going to find a lot more of the wetlands type grasses and herbs and low shrubs in this one. And there's also going to be, you know, the absence of saw palmetto. And then in certain areas, if it's fire suppressed, you're going to see that it might get a little bit more of like the shrubs. You're going to get more of like a shrubby kind of wet flatwoods. In areas that are burned like they should be, it's going to be a lot more grassy. And yeah, that's kind of general idea of how you kind of differentiate the wet flatwoods versus like the mesic that Kaylee's going to get into in a minute. Okay, so this is a very common habitat. So I included this map here from the Florida Association of Native Nurseries website. They have this map on there. And you'll see like it does kind of group in the pine flatwoods. That's in pink there. And you can see basically all over the state. But, you know, like I said, it's got different variations within those flatwoods. So one of the major characteristics is the soil is very poorly drained. It stays kind of soggy. It drains very slowly. It's acidic, it's sandy, it's low in organic matter, very low reserves of nutrients. So the plants that live here, they thrive in these kinds of conditions. Seasonally inundated, so every now and then it gets overwhelmed with water and then it drains out, but it's not going to be, you know, inundated all the time. It'll stay soggy and it kind of goes, you know, seasonally, it'll, you know, be kind of back and forth depending on how wet it is. Fire frequency naturally is anywhere from like 1 to 2 to 3 years. 1 to 5 years, like 5 years is kind of on the high side, and that's going to be, you'll start to see a little bit more of like the shrubby stuff kind of come back if it kind of goes that long. For any kind of like management plan, it's, you know, anything from like 5 to 10 years is not so great. You kind of see all the shrubs start to come back, but normally 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 years is pretty much when you'll see these are burned. Some of the rare wildlife that it supports, things like the frosted flatwood salamander, the reticulated flatwood salamander, and the Panama City crayfish, which is kind of cool. And then some of course, like the regular wildlife, Florida black bear, the white-tailed deer, raccoons, bobcats, armadillos, you know, fox squirrels, which is really cool. See those every now and then. Sandhill cranes, bald eagle, pine woods tree frog. So there's a lot of wildlife that habitats this kind of ecosystem. So here are some of the plants that are associated with this. Some of the things that are different from the xeric flatwoods would be like the large gallberry, the pond pine, featherbush maybe, sweet bay, wiregrass, and toothache grass. Those are some very characteristic plants of this. Loblolly bay, you know, obviously because it needs like the moist conditions. If it does have loblolly bay or like the pond cypress or Dahoon holly, it's going to be kind of sparse because mainly it is grassy. It doesn't have a whole lot of large shrubs or large trees. But, you know, in some of the older, you know, that hasn't been burned, you'll kind of see some of these larger trees. Cabbage palm. You will sometimes see saw palmetto in here, even though the absence of saw palmetto is what kind of gives it away that it's a wet flatwoods. But in those areas where it's kind of transitioning from like mesic to wet flatwoods, you'll see that there will be maybe some spotted areas of like saw palmetto. Other things like swamp bay, red chokeberry, blue maiden cane, coastal plain yellow-eyed grass. Yellow-eyed grass is, you know, it's a pretty big one, that and red root. Pitcher plants aren't like super common from what I've noticed anyway, but they do tend to pop up. Some other cool things are lakeside sunflower, which is something that's really very commonly found in the nursery trade. Wax myrtle as well. Celestial lily is an endangered endemic flower, which is gorgeous. I have a little teeny picture of it down in the corner there. And that one is also found in native nurseries. So a lot of these are loblolly bay, pond cypress, Dahoon holly. A lot of those are found in native nurseries also. And so basically, in this kind of plant community, if your yard kind of goes through seasonal periods of being wet and then kind of less wet, these will do well. These kinds of plants aren't always going to do, some of them may be okay, but for the most part, they're not going to do great if it dries out or if you have long periods of drought. So if your yard is the kind of place where you have like a really, really wet spot, or you live kind of like on the edge of like wetlands and you want ideas for what to plant in those kinds of areas, these are some examples of things that grow in that kind of habitat. Okay, so next we have wet prairies. This one is really very interesting. I really enjoyed learning more about this one. Just, it has a lot more diversity than I think I initially gave it credit for. So for the most part, they are grass dominated, but then they just have a multitude of flowering herbaceous wildflowers and just very, very showy certain times of year. So basically what this is a herbaceous plant community in which the soil is continuously saturated. Every now and then it could be inundated, but it's not super common for it to get kind of out of control. But it is pretty much always wet, soggy ground. It's always super saturated. This is usually a situation in which it's found kind of in between like the lower lying areas, like the depression marshes or the dome swamps, and the higher areas like the wet and mesic flatwoods. So it's kind of like, you know, kind of going down that little middle section right there where it's not really holding all the water, it's kind of draining out into like the marsh, you know, kind of areas. So, and this community is dominated a lot by grasses, wiregrass, sedges, clover muley. Savannah meadow beauty is a big one that was mentioned in a lot of resources as far as a wildflower. And these have been known to be some of the most diverse and known for just being home to tons of showy wildflowers. And in the Panhandle, even pitcher plants. There's a type of wet prairie that just basically is a pitcher plant prairie, and I'd be dying to see that one day, but it's more the Panhandle. So this one is also found statewide, except for just like the other, the wet flatwoods. This is found statewide, except for like the extreme southernmost Florida and the Keys. Something about the soil at that point kind of changes things, gives it a different classification. So that's why it's not found that far down. It's like a different kind of classification for that. And the soil, like I mentioned, is saturated, it's acidic, it also lacks nutrients. So the kind of wetland plants that do well here, you know, they don't like super nutrient soil. It's stagnant, it's wet. They do really well in that condition. This one also is fire dependent. The natural fire frequency is anywhere from like 2 to 4 years, and it usually comes naturally from like the surrounding mesic flatwoods or wet flatwoods. Whenever those catch on fire, it will very often kind of spread over into these wet prairies and also help burn it. And that keeps down the shrubs that would otherwise grow and help keep it grassy. The 3 variations of wet prairie, I'm not going to really go over these in any kind of depth because it's a lot, but there's cutthroat sheep, the 3 that are found in Florida, the calcareous, I hope I said that right, pardon, wet prairie, and then the pitcher plant prairie that's more like in the Panhandle. So in our area, it's more like the cutthroat sheep is what we have, and that refers to the kind of grass that grows there and kind of dominates that area. The wet prairies, the kind of wildlife that they attract, lots of wading birds, not as much in the way of like other birds because there's not like trees for them to perch in. So that, I thought that was interesting that for the most part, it's a lot of wading birds that it seems to attract. And of course, they're probably there hunting, you know, the other animals that are there like snakes and turtles, and there's salamanders and frogs and lizards and all sorts of cool things that like to live in that wet area. So some of the plants that are associated with this, some of the most characteristic ones, like I mentioned, was like the wiregrass, the cutthroat grasses. Those are 2 big ones. Pitcher plants, more up north, blue maiden cane, wiry beak sedge, the yellow-eyed grasses, pineland rayless, goldenrod. Those are some of the big ones associated with that community. Some of the other ones that I found, and there's kind of a huge variety of all sorts of like wildflowers, but pineland heliotrope, which is cool. I didn't realize that, but that's one of my favorites. White-top star rush. White-top star rush, and you can't really see it in the picture, but on the bottom, there's a picture of rain lily, and right above the rain lily, there is the white-top star rush. Toothache grass, hat pins, meadow beauty, which I actually have in the bottom right corner, right there. The rain lily, like I mentioned, coreopsis, all different kinds of coreopsis species, the Florida coreopsis and Leavenworth coreopsis and all kinds of coreopsis. Milkwort, different varieties. Common St. John's wort. Tenagle pipewort is pictured right there next to the coreopsis, kind of in the middle top there. So that's a really cool plant. If you have like a wetlands area, they get taller than I expected. When I first saw them in person, kind of in my area here, they will get probably, I don't know, 2 feet tall is what I've seen. And they have these big dramatic kind of hat pin looking flower heads on them that make really cool dried flowers. And they're just really, really neat. Not super common in the nursery trade, but if you have them already, keep them. They're kind of cool. And it's not something that you can find super easily. Lemon bacopa is another one that's more of like a kind of a wetland plant. So I would expect you'd probably see it more along kind of like the edges where it's a little bit more open and it can kind of go through where maybe it's a little bit more wet is what I would assume. That's where I've seen it growing kind of in my area. Marsh pink, yellow colic root, which is in that top left corner. It's kind of tall, like a, kind of reminds me of like a liatris, not quite as tall, but then like with those yellow flowers, and it kind of has like the basal plump of like grassy kind of thing. Water cowbane, false foxglove, grass pink orchids is another one, which is really cool. So if you have a spot like this and you like orchids, grass pink orchids are fairly common in the nursery trade, and it's easy to order bulbs of those, which is kind of cool. So if you have a wet spot you don't know what to do with, those are neat. So I had some extra pictures I just wanted to share too. So the gosh, I can't, Sebacia, right? Mark, I feel like I always say it wrong. Sebacia, Sabadia.
Sebacia, yeah, you got it right.
Okay.
And
that was because you said that before. I always thought it was Sabadia or something crazy like that. I pay attention to you, Mark. But this is an area that's close in my neighborhood. That's more of like this kind of prairie area that's dominated by grasses, and then seasonally, depending on, whenever, you'll see different wildflowers pop up. And this just happened to be a section where there was just tons of Sebacia, just like I don't know if I didn't point it out on the first slide. I wish I would have, but there was a field of coreopsis. So you'll kind of see, oh yeah, no, look at it. It's on like the first, like the intro kind of slide. Yeah, so it's like a field of coreopsis right there. That's in my neighborhood also, which is really cool. So like it either looks like that, or it's got the Sebacia, or it's got butterwort, or it's got some other kinds of things, but it's a really neat kind of area. The cowbane, there's a picture of the grass pink orchids. Sundew is another thing that's common that you might kind of see around like any kind of open areas that just happen to pop up. I assume it's probably going to be similar to like the lemon bacopa, where it's not, if it's in the middle of a bunch of grasses, it's not going to be there, but kind of like on the edges where it's either a little bit wet or it's like a little bit disturbed or cleared for whatever reason. That's where I would expect something like that would be. And then there's a picture of pineland heliotrope. The pineland heliotrope and then the grass pink, those are actually in my yard, not out in nature. So those are examples of some of the things that, would do well in an open, sunny spot in a wet yard. So if you had something like that, or if you'd like to do like water gardening, a lot of people like to do, like ponds, and they want kind of these emergent plants that'll just kind of go around it. These are all kind of ideas that you could do that, or just do like people will do container wetland gardens so that you can kind of control the moisture conditions if you enjoy these kinds of things. Like the cowbane is a host plant for black swallowtail. So if you like to have stuff like that, but you don't have the right conditions, you could easily do this in a pot and keep it as wet as you like, and it works out just fine.
okay, Kaylee, it's your turn.
Yep, there's my scrubs. So I know this is a very wordy slide, so I included it. I'm not going to suffer everyone through me reading it, so you can take a screenshot. It's just a lot of really good information. So it's evergreen communities with lots of shrubs, and it's infertile, very dry, white sand or clay, yellow sand also. Kind of depends on where in Florida the location is, and they're always on ridge and upland areas, like the higher elevation. So it's I think I saw it said 25 to 30 feet elevation above sea level is where scrub communities begin along the ridges, and so they're dominated mostly by pines, specifically like in my yard, sand pines. So there's different kinds of scrubs. There's a sand pine scrub, there's a rosemary scrub, and then there's the shrubby oaky scrub. And they have different kinds of oaks and pines that will, uh, grow within those areas, but it's always the dry ones. Longleaf will grow there, if baby, really. And sand pine, and there's actually a couple of slash pines out here, so I'm surprised to see those, but I think that they were planted. So you'll find, myrtle oak and sand live oak and Chapman's oak. There's rusty staggerbush, which is also known as rusty leonia. It's the leonia with the little white bell-shaped flowers. I'm having a lapse in memory on the botanical name on that one. And saw palmettos. There's lots of saw palmetto, and there's also another one called scrub palmetto, which is similar but different and less common because it's only found in upland areas. So we famously have the Lake Wales Ridge down south, and just to the north is the Ocala National Forest. They have the Ocala Ridge, and in the coast over to the east is the Atlantic Ridge. And then Seminole County and Volusia County is in like a kind of midland area between the two, where it's the I think it's called the DeLand Crescent City Ridge. I think I saw. So we're in a little small area of ridge in between there. You can see it on the map there. Scrubs can be very small and patchy, like you see just in the mosaic of the landscape. You'll see like there's flatwoods and then a seepage swamp with bog and stuff, and then just over a couple hundred yards over is going to be a scrub, and it's a lot of variances. So there's a lot of plants that you'll find that are common in all of those that are kind of adaptive, like wiregrass and fetterbush, saw palmetto, of course. And then there's different ones that are called sandy-field beak sedge, which is a kind of a grass with a tall stem, and it's got a big chunky brown seed head on the top. And they're very interesting, and I'm pretty sure the birds just absolutely love them because I always see the seed heads missing. Hair sedges and pinweeds and jointweeds. They're very interesting, very dainty, tiny. You'd step on it if you didn't know it was there, kind of a plant. And then there's ground lichens, all kinds. There's the puffy deer moss and the little matchstick soldiers, I think is the other one, is the common name for leporina. There's a lot of different lichens that'll grow in a scrub, in the fire suppressed ones especially. All right. And then here I've got this picture I wanted to use actually, especially because the person who took it, down at the bottom there, it says Steve Chrisman. He was kind of the godfather of the scrub. I've read so much of his materials just trying to learn about this. So I added that. It was a good idea of how shrubby and dry looking it is. It's almost like a desert in Florida. And you can find it on the sloped upland areas or sometimes also on flat ones, but it's always on deep, nutrient-poor white and yellow sands. You'll find scrub jays in some parts if it's got a low canopy, but scrub jays won't come around if it overgrows and has a tall canopy. You'll find gopher tortoises and Florida mouse, sand skinks, and pine snakes, indigos. There's so much stuff out here. And there's a lot of rare and endangered species because species have to adapt certain specific things to be able to survive in the harsh conditions. So they're not really found in too many other areas. And there's also a lot of common ones too, like raccoons, armadillos, just the common animals that you would see in a suburban neighborhood walking down the street. They're also out here, very abundant and happy. And then the next one, I've got some of the associated plants and animals listed on the next slide. Here we go. Sorry. There it is. So I put this picture up there. I hope she doesn't mind. I actually forgot to mention it to her, but Kim Warner took that picture at Rusty Leonia, or at Leonia Nature Preserve. It's a fantastic picture of the scrub jay there. And then there's the baby gopher tortoise and rattlesnake there were both in my yard. So you'll find them a lot out here. Pine snakes, gopher frogs, and southern toads, hawks, eagles, tufted titmouse, deer, the possums, raccoons, armadillos, and with some bugs specifically. There's a lot that are very endemic and don't survive in other areas outside of like the Lake Wales Ridge. But there's a lot also that are pretty common in other scrubs, and one of those is like the green sweat bee. They're very like they really prefer rosemaries, it seems, in my yard. I always see them on the rosemaries. I don't know if there's any facts behind that, but that's just an observational. So with the plants associated, I did go over a lot of them, but then there's more. So you'll find the Leonias, blueberries, pennyroyal, silkgrass, pawpaws, blazing stars, paintbrush, and vanilla leaf. There's certain kinds of hollies. There's sand holly and scrub holly, which will grow in a scrub. And then, of course, wiregrass and bluestem. And then I made kind of a, I guess, a vision board for the gardening that I do along the trail, and actually there along my driveway there too. So the upper left is a dry upland variety of twin flower. I forget its botanical name, the first part of it, but it's oblongifolia. And then the next is tar flower. That's growing out here naturally, and I've tried propagating it, but it is very difficult, so I haven't been able to add more of it to my yard. I've added coral bean, and there's some Adams needle, which is the Yucca filamentosa down there at the bottom. I didn't add those were there, but I've very highly encouraged them, and they're in their own happy little grouping right alongside my trail there, so I just adore that spot. I wanted to show it off. And then to the left or to the right in the middle is a little garden that I just set up about 2 weeks ago. So everything's still in the baby phase. It doesn't look, established. So native gardening is not always going to look showy and everything. So I wanted to kind of give that realistic example there. I've got a baby sand pine there, some blue stem grass, a sparkleberry, and at the bottom is the coral bean. And in that area is also some beautyberry and twin flower. And then down at the very far bottom is pennyroyal, because I just absolutely love that stuff, and it seems to really, really feed the bees. So those are some great plant choices. Oh, good idea to zoom. Oops. There we
I
go.
always try, but I fail.
We went on a little adventure there. That's okay.
Yeah, I wanted to zoom in. Pennyroyal is such a forgiving and fragrant plant. Beautiful.
Oh yes, if you just rub it on your hand, it smells so good. The leaves and the foliage, the flowers, even when you smell it, they're good.
Yeah.
I love them. And the gopher tortoises do not like them, so it's one plant that survives.
Good to know.
All right. And I think that's it for the scrub. Yep. And go on to mesic flatwoods. Once again, I did this thing where I, put in all of the information for people to screenshot, and I'm just going to talk about it. So they have a very open canopy in mesic flatwoods, similar to how Gia described with the wet flatwoods. So, but the difference with mesic flatwoods is you'll find the shrubby understory of saw palmetto, blueberries, and huckleberries. Those kinds of plants will grow to be, a decent size tall and shade out the herbs and forbs and stuff that you would see in the wet flatwoods. So it's the most widespread in Florida, flatwoods in general, because there's just so many, I think, and they, mosaic together and do their thing. But so in longleaf flatwoods, longleafs were heavily logged and for their harvested for the turpentine, so they were not left in huge abundance anymore. And then slash pine was planted in its place on pine plantations, and since that, slash pine has kind of spread abundantly and fills in a lot of gaps. But every now and then you can find some longleaf pines that are mature, old growth, and they are just so beautiful. You want to hug them. And the characteristic plants are like saw palmetto and gallberry, staggerbush, fetterbush. You'll see small shrubs like dwarf live oak, runner oaks, which are, they stay very low. They don't get very big, and they have little round acorns. And shiny blueberry, dwarf blueberry, and huckleberry. And what's funny about blueberries is they will cross genetics. So you'll have some pretty hard blueberries to identify sometimes, but just let them grow and feed the birds, and that's kind of my motto with them. All right. So the next one, yeah, that would be the that's the flatwoods at Savage Christmas Creek, where Gia and I went hiking earlier this year. I'm pretty sure, at least I was scrolling through photos, and I'm pretty sure that's by the timing of the photos that's Savage Christmas Creek and the mesic flatwoods we found there. And so it's soil type is, you'll see a layer of sand on the top, and if you dig down, then there's a layer just a few feet down of organic or clay hardpan or subsoil below. And it's usually in very low-lying flat areas, so the water table is just not too far below the surface, basically. And then it's got black bears, pine warblers, and nuthatches, and bobcats as their signature critters. And the plants that grow in mesic flatwoods have to be really adapted to crazy conditions that Florida can throw at it. So wet season, they can be very saturated, and dry season, they can get very dry, cracky soil and can't survive very well, but they find a way. And then in occurrence of fire, flatwoods will see fire about every 3 years, or at least the mesic flatwoods will see fire every 3 years. And so the animals will adapt to that. Like with gopher tortoises, they've got their burrows that go underneath the sand, and they'll dig down into the hard pan, but they prefer not to. But you will find gopher tortoises there because it's drier. And then down at the bottom there is actually a photo from, I think, Jonathan Dixon State Park, where the Florida Forestry Service did a burn there. And I thought that was a very interesting picture to capture, because prescribed fire is so important to sustaining the plant communities. And so people will complain about the smoke because it does, suck to breathe it in, but it's very important for these communities. And so the next one shows more of these critters and plants. So like I said, is the longleaf pine with the wiregrass and runner oak, and then slash pines with gallberry and saw palmetto. And you'll see like intermingled between everything is the hollies. I'm pretty sure dahoon would grow there. Maybe. I'm guessing on that because I don't know hollies. Probably a sand holly, I would guess, because of the dry sand. Pawpaws, wax myrtles, and fetterbush and foxglove. Excuse me. And tarflower and blackroot. Although now that I'm looking at it, a lot of those kind of seem like they would be wetter conditions, so I wonder if it would be a border in between dry flatwoods to wet flatwoods. I think, Gia, you had some of those plants were very similar in that.
Oh yeah, there's definitely a few that kind of overlap for sure. The wiregrass, the gallberry. So I think with more of the wet flatwoods, there was more prevalence of large gallberry, but gallberry not as much unless it was kind of in that transition. No blueberries, I don't think that I saw. Wax myrtle, yes. Fetterbush, yes. Yeah, so there's a few things
They're
that kind of overlap there,
adaptive plants
which makes
or
sense.
transitional kind of deal. So I've got also, I put in, the black bear. He's very common in flatwoods communities, coming into neighborhoods and stuff because neighborhoods are built in these communities. So I thought that picture was very cute. I wanted to add that. You'll see there's the Bachman sparrow, which I believe is a protected bird, and then an oak toad down there at the bottom, which is one that I found on a recent hike. That I just thought it was very cute. It looked similar to a southern toad, so I was mixed up, and then iNaturalist identified it as an oak toad. And then there's gray foxes and Florida panthers can be seen through flatwoods. So in these, open communities, they attract a lot of wildlife, and when you have a lot of wildlife, you get the predators coming too, which is a good sign. And then the next slide is another one of these vision boards there I made. So I, at the far right there, I'll start with that one. That's my littlest going through a trail in a flatwoods with, I'm going to say, I think that's fetterbush. It might be blueberry, growing very tall in the flatwoods there that we were at. I honestly can't remember which hike that was. But so I love the idea of this path, and so I wanted to put together some ideas of plants to kind of put around the path. And so there's like saw palmetto would be a good, it's meant to be there and as a placeholder for that shrubbery level. And then you could do some tar flowers and beauty berries for some color and diversity with goldenrod, wiregrass, leotris, and the pea vine. Those are a climber. They'll go up into and create some interest, height interest. So I thought that it would be nice to give an idea of the inspiration for bordering a trail like that. I just thought it was very neat. It's a dream because I can't do a flatwoods in my own yard. And I think that one wraps up my slides there.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. So I have hydric hammock. So there is a formal description. You can find it on FNAI. Actually, I have the FNAI link here. It's rather, it's a guide to the natural communities of Florida in case you guys want to check it out. I had pasted the link in the chat box as well, so you guys have it. But just to highlight the key points, for hydric hammock, flooding, if it occurs, is short. So even though we see this big, lush rainforest, quote unquote, not rainforest, but look to it, flooding doesn't occur that much. It's a very short period. And flooding from rivers, seepage, and spring discharge may also contribute to hydric conditions. So you may have a small creek running through the property. This may be part of a water flow or a surface flow towards a lake. That would create a hydric hammock condition. And the bottom center, towards the bottom right, is a close-up of the map from FAN or University of Florida, and it shows the hydric hammock conditions in Seminole County. They kind of run across into Brevard and Volusia as well. and it's in this deep purple right here. So, what are the key facts of hydric hammock? They're found in different parts of the state, much like what Gia and Kaylee presented on. They are part of the swamp ecosystem. So this forms under the swamp ecosystem umbrella. They are very high in species richness, and they're only second to river swamps. So I found this from the Ecosystems of Florida, this book right here. It's a nice book for intermediate learners. But I'm going to try to zoom in without screwing it up. But I wanted to show this really cool generalized table that shows species richness of woody vegetation on the x-axis. Yeah, I'm sorry, on the y-axis, and on the x-axis we have hydroperiod, which is basically flooding, increased sheet flow of water. So river swamps show really high rates of species richness for woody vegetation, and then hydric hammock comes at a close second. But as you can see, the hydro period, the number of months that we have flooding, is much shorter as compared to base swamp or a bog. This bottom picture right here shows fire frequency. So this is another important key point. Oh, I did it again, didn't I? All right, let me try to exit out of it. There we go. So there is a hydro period with that as well, and shows that fire frequency within a hydric hammock is very rare, if at all. So, they are not affected by fire frequency at all. That's a key point with hydric hammocks. And much like Gia's discussion on flatwoods, mesic flatwoods, hydric hammocks have high canopy production. They also have high mid-story production as well. So it's not just up in the canopy, it's also mid-story. The canopy insect production is very high. I'm going to try to do the pointer thing instead rather than zooming in. But insect production in the canopy is high. The production of edible fruits and seeds is high. And the cavity density for birds to nest in and other animals is high. The density of vegetation is low. So when we're looking at it on the ground level, the density of vegetation is much lower. And it ties into the fact that the canopy is already built in. So the amount of sunlight that is reaching the forest floor is low. So things that are tolerant of that, very shade tolerant native plant species, ferns, other ones that I'll touch base on, those are the ones that you'll find on the forest floor. But it's not as dense as people would imagine because the canopy has been, it just obstructs sunlight from reaching the forest floor. So what types of native plants are associated with this? This is just a short list because the diversity is extraordinary. So we have ferns. I can't go without mentioning our beloved Cuplet Fern. This is one of our members, Nita, and this is a good kind of size up. She's about, 5'6", and this plant is towering above her. This is a close-up of the leaf. It's a really magnificent fern here in Central Florida, Seminole County. But Cuplet Fern is one of the many ferns you'll find. You'll find southern shield fern, royal fern, cinnamon fern. Again, with what Gia said, you'll find a lot of commonalities with oaks. Here, water oak will also be present. Swamp dogwood will be present. Magnolias will be present. Swamp bays will be present. I think Jennifer will be touching base on that afterwards. Ball cypress, sweet gum. And then I put a hash mark right here. So these are the trees, and these are the plants that you will find in the edge of the forest where they're getting adequate sunlight. So canna, loosestrife, dog fennel, Carolina elephant's foot, shiny lionia, innocence, sesbania, stinking camphorweed. It's a rather pretty plant, but apparently it's a stinking type of plant. And when I smelled it, it wasn't horrible. So, I unfortunately feel that this particular native species is suffering from a marketing problem. But elderberry, Joe Pye weed, this is a beautiful picture of a close-up of the Joe Pye weed inflorescence. Those are common along the edge of the hammock where sunlight is reaching the forest floor. So this is inside the hammock. So this is a typical scene. This is southern shield fern, Thelipteris species. And this is Thelipteris kuntai. Another one is this very diminutive looking wildflower, also known as Elephantopas carolinus. Another one that you'll find is magnolia. So we have Magnolia grandiflora. And of course, let's not forget our beautiful cinnamon fern. So there's a close-up of its fertile frond right there. So those are typical of the forest floor, the hammock floor inside the hydric hammock. But right around the edge where the sunlight hits, you'll find yellow canna, and these are its dried seed pods right here. So this has gone to fruit or to seed. And then you'll find elderberry. You'll find Joe Pye weed. And right here you also have sweet gum. So there's some sweet gum young plants there. You'll find winged loosestrife. This is Lythrum alatum. And this is our marketing problem native plant, stinking camphorweed. Isn't it beautiful? It's quite striking. Plukia fetida.
That one, so I have that one, and I think it's the, was it Plukia odorata or something? It's the small pink ones. That one stinks. That one is horrible. So that's the one that should have got that name. This one's not that bad. So it's more like not just smelling the flowers, but crushing the leaves and smelling it. I mean, it's got a smell, but the other one, look, it looks very pretty. And the reason I know this is because I've made a floral arrangement with those, and I brought it in the house, and my boys kept asking me where the okay, this is sorry. Okay, they kept asking me where the cat pee smell was coming from, and we figured out it was coming from the plants. It's stuck on the entire house. So yeah, this other one, the white one, it's not bad at all compared to the pink one. It's
the odorata. Okay.
Mega stinky. Yeah.
Oh well, all right. And then we have Cornus fiamina, also known as swamp dogwood. This one is a great bird tree. The fruit production on this is very high, and you'll always find this right around the hydric hammock edge, where it needs more amounts of sunlight than in the middle or towards, as you progress into the hydric hammock. So hydric hammock, non-native plant species. So these are things, in case you have a property that erstwhile was hydric hammock, places in Longwood, for example, you might have a hydric hammock type backyard, places in, I would say, Winter Springs as well. If you're in Seminole County, if you're a Central Florida resident, you know these cities quite well. So these are some non-native plants that you should look out for. So wax begonia is one that escaped horticulture and then became a noxious pest plant. And it is associated with wetlands. Wedelia, everybody swears at Wedelia, pretty little thing, but can be pretty, naughty. Sphagnatica triloba, Caesar weed. So Caesar weed is more competitive along the edge or a break in the canopy. It's important to note that Caesar weed has been a introduced weed for over 100 years. It was brought in very early on. in the horticultural trade. I believe it was brought in for its fiber. It was thought of as a fiber crop, but then it escaped cultivation pretty quickly. And then it's more competitive along the edge where you get some sunlight, but when it's on the forest floor, inside, completely shaded out hammock, shouldn't worry about it too much because it's not going to compete or won't be that aggressive. Peruvian primrose, same thing, kind of encroaches where the sunlight is. Sesbania. This is Sesbania. This is also called bag pod. So Sesbania is much like our primrose species. So we all know that Peruvian primrose is bad news, bad plant, naughty plant. Sesbania is another one, but it also has some native varieties, much like primrose does. So we have to, once it flowers, these flowers are yellow. The ones that are red are native, but that's not a rule of thumb. There are some native yellow flowering Sesbanias as well. Torpedo grass, Jennifer can vouch for this, but once torpedo grass is established, good luck trying to eradicate it. It's a very problematic invasive plant. Old world climbing fern. So here's a picture of it climbing up a stem. And coral ardesia. So coral ardesia is found in hammocks. They can tolerate shade quite well. This was a plant that was brought in by horticulture for its pretty leaves. It has interesting leaves. It has interesting fruit, red colored fruit. But unfortunately, with coral ardesia, it escaped cultivation and then it shades out seedlings, which are essential for the next generation of native plants. So they compete with seedlings rather than mature plants. Xeric hammock. So xeric hammock is not a like a natural plant community. This was actually derived when fire exclusion or artificial fire regimen was cut out. So this is what happens to sandhill. This is what happens to scrub. This is what happens to scrubby flatwoods when fire is suppressed. Or if it's infrequent fire regimen and they're using it for wintertime burns. So wintertime burns are less aggressive. They're used to slowly remediate a property so that it can take a more intense summertime burn. But sometimes you'll see xeric hammocks in areas where they do infrequent wintertime burns, but that's not the rule of thumb. Usually xeric hammocks develop when sandhill and scrub has not been treated with fire for over 30 years. So it takes a really long time, and then these other native plant species invade this area and it becomes a more mesic environment. So I've gone ahead and circled what used to be sandhill environment right here in Seminole County. This is Sanford, Altamont is here, Lake Mary is here, and number 6 is actually Geneva. So that used to be erstwhile sandhill communities, and more likely than not, when you're dealing with a residential area, fire has been suppressed, and you'll find xeric hammock in those areas. So key facts about xeric hammock. So they need deep sandy soil. They're the advanced successional stage of sandhill or scrub, and they're associated with prolonged fire suppression for over 30 years. And they are very coveted by developers. Why? Because it's deep sandy soil, well drained. Water doesn't pool there. Why not build a house or a strip mall over it? So it's an ecosystem that is disappearing very rapidly. It is dominated by oaks and saw palmetto and different types of, in case you are in Gia's neck of the woods, because she's closer to the coast than we are. So they have something called temperate hardwood forest right along the Brevard County coastline. So those are separate from xeric hammocks. Even though they may have the same types of plant communities, they're treated differently. It's important to know that. So we don't go to temperate hardwood forests along the coast in Brevard County and treat it like a xeric hammock. We look at it as a separate plant community, and it's measured by the location rather than soil moisture. This was another good graph from that Ecosystems of Florida book. So I'm going to attempt to zoom in without causing issues, but here's an unburned site. And we have Pityopsis, Florida green eyes, Chapmania, and look how, sluggish the slope is. But with the burn site, July, August, September, October, and then January, you see a great response in germination rate. So this is a reason why we don't see many wildflowers, because they're so dependent on fire regimen in erstwhile sandhill and scrub areas. So they've been essentially pushed out. They may be part of the seed bank, but over time the seed bank will dwindle away, and they really are dependent on fire. So unfortunately with xeric hammock, the wildflowers that you associate with sandhill and scrub environments are also eliminated. But you do have a different plant community. So you'll have live oak, you'll have bromeliads. This is a cardinal air plant right here, Tillandsia species. Our wonderful saw palmetto that attracts over 300 species of pollinators. We have the beautiful resurrection fern, which actually got its own species. It's now Pleopeltis michosiana. It used to be, something else. I forget now. Pleopeltis polypoidioides. That's a tongue twister. But now it's Pleopeltis michosiana, and it's actually the way these the underside of the fronds position themselves, the scales. So interesting fun fact there. But it's sparsely vacant understory, so you won't see a lot of action going on as far as plants right on the forest floor, much like with hydric hammock, but for a completely different reason. So like hydric hammock, sunlight is not reaching the forest floor, but the soil type and the hydrology is very different. So you'll get rusty lionia here, you'll get sparkleberry, but they're very sparse, and they don't come around that often. Matter of fact, when we see a lusty lionia in xeric hammock, it's rather tall because it's been fire has been suppressed for so long, so they just keep growing taller and taller and taller. So that's another indication that you're dealing with xeric hammock. Some cool plants. So in case you are on a developed site for xeric hammock, so you have Ilex opaca, variety of renicola. This is the scrub holly. So this is an endemic variety to Florida and endemic to Central Florida in its inland counties. So it's a really nice plant to showcase if you're gardening with it. This is what a tree looks like mature. Let me try to point it. It's right over here. It's kind of hard to tell, but that's how big it gets. And these are the close-up of its leaves. So this is an endemic variety to Central Florida. Another good one is blue jack oak. So we know of our live oak, we know of our sand live oak, we know of Chapman's oak, but this is this is Chapman's oak. So Chapman's oak, you can tell by the tree trunks, they don't get as wide as live oaks do. They stay slender and tall. And this is blue jack oak. So blue jack has a very interesting coloration to its leaf undersides. And it's a nice addition in case you want to separate yourself from just using the same type of oaks that are normally found in big box stores. So native plants that are associated with xeric, non-native plants that are associated with xeric hammock. Coral ardesia, same as hydric hammock. Caesar weed. This is more competitive in xeric hammocks than in hydric hammocks because there is more sunlight. So Caesar weed does require access to sunlight often in order for it to be aggressive and competitive with our native plants. Old world climbing fern and tuberous sword fern. So tuberous sword fern is a problem in many types of gardens. And when you uprooted, you'll find those little nodules on the roots. And another way of actually noticing that you have the invasive sword fern, because we do have a native sword fern, is its size. It doesn't get the fronds don't get too big. I mean, this is as big as it gets. You know, so I mean, if you compare it to leaf litter, you can kind of get an idea of its size, but it stays rather small, on the smaller end. All right, and those are my slides.
All right, so I picked Sandhill because this is the property that is undeveloped next to mine, so I've had the most experience with it, and I've been learning a lot about it as the years have gone by. I can see the, you know, this is a fire suppressed community, and I see the xeric hardwoods establishing towards the areas where it's more dense. So this is located on high and dry ground, often on gently rolling hills. The trees are widely spaced with an open canopy that allows sunlight to reach the ground. The signature tree species are longleaf pine interspersed with turkey oak. And I noticed when I was looking online, there's different types of turkey oak, so it's specifically the Quercus leavis. Because of the relationship between the two trees, Sandhill has been called the Longleaf Pine Turkey Oak Association. As fires suppress, the oaks tend to take over. There will be a lot more turkey oak and other types of oaks. I see probably it's sand live oak within it, and larger live oak type species. While there are many similarities between scrub forests and sandhills, such as dry sandy soil, sandhills are easily distinguished by the tall longleaf pines and open grassy ground cover. Interspersed with pines are turkey oaks and other hardwood species such as sandpost oak, bluejack oak, and persimmon. And I guess go to the next slide. So this is a pathway that we take frequently. Along the lines of the trees, there are a lot of gopher apple. And I notice with the gopher apple, there are a lot of plants that seem to be associated with it. So the diversity where the sun is hitting is pretty amazing. So there's saw palmetto. I noticed there's a smaller variety of saw palmetto, and the larger palmetto grows there. The prickly pear cactus, woody or semi-woody shrubs and vines such as gopher apple, there's Darrow's blueberry, buckroot, shiny blueberry, deerberry. The ground cover is herbaceous, dominated by several grass species and wildflowers. Wiregrass is the signature grass. Asclepias humistrata, the sandhill milkweed. I forgot to add a picture of that, but it's a really beautiful milkweed. It's it's a leathery, thick leaf. It has pink veination. Florida Indian plantain, which is endemic, that grows frequently around here, and soft green eyes and Florida green eyes. Coastal plain golden aster, Leopteris elegans, and Pauciflora. Chapmania floridana, the Chapman's pea, and lupines. It's really interesting to see here. A lot of these wildflowers will create like colonies. They've become pretty large colonies, and they're very reliable to find as throughout the years when it's their season to bloom. Okay. So the plant communities that inspire me the most is kind of what I was trying to focus on with the images. So partridge pea and jewel blue eye grass is really frequent here. They seem to be together. The blue-eyed grass and the partridge pea will grow amongst other plants as well, but these are usually just always together. And for me, that's a real inspiration for in my yard. I want to have those together. And the partridge pea is a host plant for sulfur butterflies, and lots of different pollinators love both the flowers. Next. And when you see large colonies of the gopher apple, if you look closely, you'll notice there's a lot of different plants growing with it. So I said diversity is abundant where the sun shines. So this is along the edges of where the trees are growing. A lot of the trees, like the pines, are taller, so it allows more sunlight to hit. So you have the jewel blue-eyed grass. You have nailwort, which is this really pretty ground cover that it has these tiny little white flowers, and it's got an interesting history. They thought it was medicinal for some kind of foot problem or something like that. And I really love the gopher apple, how it changes throughout the year. During springtime, it's a bright green, and it kind of fades away to a deeper green. And this one right here is relatively recent, so you can see it's kind of getting the brown orangey colors. And over here is just a really small spot that I took a picture of, and real life always looks so much prettier than images. But so you have the gopher apple as the dominant species here. There's bull netto, which is Nodosus stimulosus. The stings when you touch it. The leaves are very, you can tell by the leaves, the shape of it's distinct. It's kind of like a palmate leaf with spiky hairs on it. Then there's Virginia dayflower. You probably can't see my mouse, can you? The Virginia dayflower is that little blue flower. And the brown pieces, the brown stringy things, are actually, it's partridge pea that has died for the year. So the time period when this image was took was actually springtime. So it really changes throughout the year. When the partridge pea comes back, it kind of just grows right over top of this, and you'll see it still within. And a lot of times you'll see different legumes growing in it also. So this is why people don't like taking walks with me, because I want to look at what's in this like square foot area. Right, go to the next one. So these are different colonies that I find throughout the property. So we have the fall sunflower, so I'm going to hopefully not butcher the name, Phobanthus grandiflorus. And this little space is in a field of a grass that I don't know. It just looks like regular grass. It doesn't seem to seed that often. I don't know if it needs fire or something. But there's this beautiful patch of the sunflower, and in the background you can see the saw palmetto. And then this one in the middle is pine barren frostweed, and it is just this huge area. It's got this like mystical green silvery color, and it doesn't really show up in here, but there's a lot of cladonia. They call it deer moss. There's different varieties of cladonia growing next to the frostweed, so it's got bright color, white colors. And there's other little diminutive plants growing around it. That nailwort is in there. You can't tell with that picture. And then on the right corner is a close-up of the frostweed, the frostweed. It doesn't really show the pollen is orange, so the little stamens have the orange pollen at the tips of it. And those are really delicate flowers. If you shake them, the petals will fall off. So it's a really amazing spot when they're all blooming together. Next. Oh, I should say, sorry. In the distance, you can see where it's overgrown. So it's starting to turn into the xeric hardwood. I actually, when I walk over here, I try to pop off little pines and oaks to keep the sunlight here, just to try to keep something. I don't, they say fire suppression causes it, but it's like, I haven't seen any fires here, so I don't know how it's suppressed exactly. On the other side of the forest, towards the other city, there was a fire at one point, so maybe that was the fire. That happened a couple years ago. Maybe that was the suppressed fire. All right, now go next. And here's another, this lupine is part of this huge colony that it reliably comes up every year. You can see the different ages. There's from seedlings all the way to large mature plants, and it's gorgeous and amazing. And it's also in this like little sunny spot that, is about to be taken over. And I'm just hoping nobody runs it over, because we have a lot of off-roaders here, and it just takes one rough ride to just destroy this whole patch. And right now, this time of year, this slender flat top goldenrod, I think it is. But then I was looking at other plants, and I was wondering if it might be something else, because there's like rayless something that's yellow also. And then I think it's dog fennels back there. But then there's another plant that looks like dog fennel. But that's what I've identified it as, is the slender flat top goldenrod and dog fennel. And it's just really pretty this time of year with these large patches of yellow and white blooming together. And it also has blue stem grass, and witch's broom grass is another one that's growing right along with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. It is a slender, flat-top goldenrod. It is not part of
Yeah, I
the
noticed that it was not a
Solidago
Solidago
genus. Yeah, but it's a very pretty fall blooming plant. It looks pretty grassy, or just a basic shrub for the rest of the year. But in fall, it comes alive with these
Yeah,
just this nice
it's
haze of yellow.
great
At
to
the very,
have the
it's
variation.
beautiful.
And gopher tortoises are all over the sandhill. It's a keystone species found here and also in scrubland. I really get charmed by the places they pick. This one has the Pityopsis growing with it, and some other grasses. And a lot of times I'll just, admire their locations. They'll have like this log with fungus and different, different little lichens growing on it, and it just looks like a little setup. And I've seen a lot of different pawpaw species growing on this property. This one is slim leaf pawpaw. I've also seen flag pawpaw, and another one, I can't think of the name of it, but they're all growing near each other. And this one on the right is Florida green eyes. And those are, it's actually growing next to deerberry, a really large patch of deerberry. And there's also Queen's Delight that's growing in that space. Another one of those spaces where there's sunlight around where trees are. Next. And throughout the grassy areas where there's fields and lots of sun, I'm really surprised by the different varieties of legumes, different vines. Sometimes they grow up the the dog fennel and along fallen logs and just growing along the ground also. So this one was identified as Tephrosia spicata, or spiked hoary. The images I saw online were more red, and this one's kind of like a magenta pinkish color. So it's possible it hybridized with something else. And then the coastal plain dawnflower. This one likes to grow in the partridge pea, and it blooms when the partridge pea is either just beginning to leaf out, or it's got a bunch of like dead bushes from the past season. So it really stands out with the gray brown of the dead partridge pea bushes. And that one's related to morning glories, I believe. And then the endemic Arnoglosum floridanum, or the Florida Indian plantain, that one seems to grow in a part sun zone rather than full sun. And the butterfly pea, or Centrosema virginianum, those are a few of the legumes that I've seen, but there's several others all over the place. But it's just these three right here are growing within a very close space to each other, and that's just so cool to me. Next. Okay, so this is also very close to where the sand hill is. And I notice walking on the property, you know, the elevation goes down. There's a pond that just shows up somewhere, and it has Dahoon holly around it with little bog button grass, and then over to the we'll say to the west, there's like a small, I think it's a bay gall. It's been fragmented because there's a pasture that separates it, so it might have been a bay swamp or a bay head at one point. So a bay gall typically develops on wet soils at the bases of slopes, edges of floodplains, in depressions, and in stagnant drainages. The soils are generally composed of peat with an acidic pH of 3.5 to 4.5. So seepage from uplands, rainfall, and or capillary action from adjacent wetlands maintains a saturated peat substrate. While bay galls are not generally influenced by flowing water, they are often drained by small blackwater streams. Although most bay galls are small in acreage, some form large mature forests, often called bay swamps. So I didn't know the difference between that before. So it's like there's small areas that can be dominant bay species, and then there's medium and large. And this area of land that hasn't been developed, there's also several cypress dominant swamp areas. And this particular bay swamp, I think the cypress was removed in the past. I think historically there would have been a few cypress in it. So the characteristic tree species are loblolly bay, sweet bay, and swamp bay. But there's also other tree species that will grow in the same plant community. So other species that you can find are large gallberry, Dahoon holly, wax myrtle, Florida anise tree, swamp tupelo, sweet gum, smilax laurifolia, muscadine grape, cinnamon fern, sphagnum mosses, and various other fern species, including netted chain ferns. So the image on the left is the sweet gum during autumn. And the image on the right, I think that's from Alexander Springs. And as far as I know, at Alexander Springs, that is a bay swamp. It's dominantly bay trees. And I think my favorite thing about wetland trees and any wetland zone is the lichens and the vines and tillandsia that grow on the trees, and the stuff growing from the fallen limbs and on the ground. It's just adds a mystical interest to it. It's like little fairyland or something.
I love Alexander Springs.
Yeah. So this is the dominant tree species at the bay swamp where I live is the loblolly bay tree, and the flowers smell so sweet. You can smell it in the wind when it's blowing in your direction. Right now, the silvery part of the leaves are shining, when the sun hits it, and these provide food for caterpillars, which provides food for birds, and pollinators need the flowers, so it's a useful tree. Next. And here's the swamp bay, Persea palustris. And so they have these tiny little white flowers, and the berries are kind of black. Another important plant for pollinators and birds. Next. And here's the large gallberry, Ilex cassine. So it's related to the Dahoon holly and the Yupon holly. They're both from the Ilex genus. And you can kind of see how the flowers are comparable. And this one also has a black berry, important for pollinators and birds. So right now the birds are coming from up north to Florida, and these are the types of trees that they need during this time of year. And so we have the Dahoon holly, and the the flower stage and the berry stage. This is a beautiful tree to include in your yard. And the Florida anise tree, this one I've seen at Alexander Springs. The flowers are beautiful. They smell good. One thing about walking through a bay swamp is you can smell the leaves without even crushing them sometimes. And it's a really peaceful, pleasant smell. Just it's a place that I want to stay. Just it's like a breath of fresh air. So that's another inspiring factor. I wish I had more wetland to include lots of bay trees and anise and stuff like that. Although it is near me, it's not right by my house. So to go to it, I have to walk several hundred feet. So it's not always convenient. So when I was looking for places to find images, Little Big Econ apparently has a bay swamp within. And so if someone wants to visit, that looks like a really fun hike with this little boardwalk here going through the wetland. I think sometimes it floods. I've seen pictures of it flooded. So wear some boots, waterproof preferably. And this one's showing some tillandsia growing up a tree. So in dry and wet forests, you'll see tillandsia growing, and different types of mosses and lichens growing up the trees. So these trees provide its own little microhabitat for the epiphytic plants. Next. And like I was saying, I really love the fallen branches and logs and stuff like that, supporting these little fungi, mosses, and lichens. And that field trip we went to seemed to be bay dominated, and I noticed there was the space around where the bay trees and the Dahoon holly was a space where there was red root, but the red root was changing to this these fall colors, and it just looked like fire to me. So I had to get a picture of that. And on the right side shows what the flower looks like for the red root. On the property where I live, there's a cypress swamp, and it's covered in red root in the center of it. There's a time period where it's all blooming, and then a time period where it's all looking like fire. And then when it regrows in the spring, it's the brightest green, and the sun's, speckling through, and it's interesting all throughout the year. And, it's interspersed with cinnamon fern and different types of ferns. So there's other things that kind of tag on to the primary plants that provide a lot of interest. And that's the end.
Well, thank you. I knew this was going to be a longer presentation, but this one is in the books. We'll definitely have this to revisit forever and ever in our YouTube library, folks. We have wrapped things up. If you have any questions or comments, now is a good time to ask us. I have put in our chat box a couple of times in case you would like to revisit this. Please revisit it on our YouTube channel. The link has been provided as well. Usually with longer style presentations, I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I like to play it in my car. Sometimes I like to play it while I'm making dinner or prepping something that takes a little bit longer so I can listen to it in the background. It's good educational information. And, it's good to revisit it so that way you can always get inspired by a native plant community that happens to be in your backyard or happens to be in your neighborhood. And you can utilize this information to your advantage, group plants accordingly, and watch them bring all sorts of wildlife and pollinators and critters and everything. When you plant it, they will come. So it's a great way to utilize plant communities to your advantage and garden smartly and efficiently. And in a way, like Kaylee and Gia were mentioning, right plant, right place. But with plant communities, you're also extending that further with right plant, right historical place. So take advantage of it. All right, guys, I think we are wrapping things up here. Ann Kennedy writes, thank you so much. Excellent information. Lynette wrote, in-depth knowledge. Thank you, Lynette. Appreciate that. Kim Heiss was checking out our plants while we were live streaming. Kevin Songer says, what an amazing presentation. Thank you, Kevin. And then Jenny also writes, thank you. All right, guys, that'll wrap things up for now, and we will see you another time. Take care. Okay, bye, everyone.